The brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp, brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp. The brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the brothers Wisp.
Hey everybody, this is Greg of the Brothers Wisp, number 155, coming to you from the motherland, Texas, in my rearranged little office area here. It may not look different, but I am like 3 feet to the left. New and exciting. Let's see, what else do we have going? We have a couple of new faces. Well, I say new faces. They're becoming quite the regulars, and by regular I mean I've seen Thrift more than once in the last 6 months. So yeah, it's regular for him, and I'm gonna take it when I can get it. So speaking of Andrew, Thrift, all the way from Australia.
Hey everyone.
Love the accent. Then we also have Nick Arellano from Illinois.
Hi.
Excellent. All right, let's get the other stuff out of the way really quick. We don't have any new patrons, but if you want to be a patron and have me read out your name, you go to patreon.com/thebrotherswisp. You get access to the patron-only Slack, and you support me moving my desk left and right. Right? That's what funds it. I have to move. It's very carefully orchestrated process. It requires a lot of supervision. But we also have sponsors. So we are brought to you by Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operational support system. If you want to learn more, you just pop over to Sonar.Software. We also have Tower Coverage. Tower Coverages are RF propagation systems to empower your network. Real-time data metrics enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today, towercoverage.com. All right. So I would say first things first, Mikey is not going to be on the cast for quite a while because he had his son today, I think. At least he posted pictures today. Oh. So congrats to Mikey and everybody. Send him...
congrats, Mike.
Yeah, definitely send him emails saying congrats on... your kid coming with a pre-built-in SFP. He's ready to go. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to hear it. All right. So why do we have Thrift? We always have Thrift for a very specific reason. One, because he's got amazing hair. Look at that chiseled jawline. He's an attractive man.
I even did my hair for you today, Greg. It's like, should I bother doing it? And I was like,
And you got the V-neck going, so it's just, man, it's just your proportions are killing me today. You're killing me today. But we usually have him in here when there is a new round of hardware from any vendor, really, because he's pretty knowledgeable on that stuff. But generally on the Mikrotik stuff, he's got a special place in his heart for it. So there was a new round of several different products, and he's here to talk to us in depth about it. And I even actually got off my butt and did a little research myself. Surprise, surprise. Even I surprise myself occasionally. So
probably done more than me, Greg.
I seriously doubt it. It was like 30 minutes of Googling. So there you go. It's mostly stuff I'm sure you already know what it is, wherein me, I don't keep up with these things. So, so it's all new to me. So let's start out with, I guess the flagship product of this new newsletter, because all this stuff's in the newsletter, the new announcements, all that stuff. It's the CCR2016-1G-12XS-2XQ. So
what a mouthful.
It rolls right off the tongue. It's simple as can be. I don't know what you're talking about. So tell me a little bit about this product, what makes it interesting and exciting for you.
Well, this is Mikrotik's new baller flagship router. It's basically the replacement for the CCR1072, so it sits at the top of the food chain as far as all of their routers are concerned. What's a bit different about it? Well, it's the first router from Mikrotik that's got hot swappable power supplies and hot swappable fans, so they've definitely taken all of the feedback, I guess, from people on the forums and Mikrotik user meetings and that sort of thing. It's also got a significantly improved cooling architecture. So they're really making, I guess, generational changes there and improvements. But the big things are this has 2 times 100 gigabit ports and 12 times 25 gigabit ports on it. So this is the first product from Mikrotik that's actually got that. As far as I'm aware, they've had no other products with 100 gigabit ports. And the other thing is all of these ports are wired to a Marvell switching ASIC, so they can forward at wire speed. So this means that if you've got a network that's pairing on an internet exchange at 100 gigabit, there's a high chance that traffic will be able to go in one 100 gig port and out to the rest of your network at 100 gig without touching the CPU of the router. So that's fairly impressive in its own right. It can hold up to 120,000 prefixes in the ASIC. So a fair number, not as much as I'd like to see, but you know, can't ask for too much at this price point. And the big thing is the price point is $2,795 US. So that's about a tenth of the price of a really good discount on a Juniper MX204, which is comparable. So it's really, really well priced.
That is mind-blowing, right? Because I remember a decade ago, we were talking about 10 gig stuff, like marveling that we might be able to get it like sub 10 grand or something like that, right? And here we are looking at 100 gig interfaces. Well, I mean, 100 gig plus 25 gig interfaces, right? There's nothing bite-sized on this. Like everything is big. It is the standard form factor, like of the CCR stuff. It looks the same. You know, I was looking at, I think it was on Serve the Home or somebody like that. They were showing some comparable, I'm doing air quotes here, comparable products, and just the amount of chips, the amount of heat sinks required on that infrastructure was incredible. So to me, that says this is low power profile on this piece of equipment. I was looking at it, max power consumption 128 watts at 120 volts. We're talking 1 amp to run this thing full tilt. That's crazy. It's like, how do you get this much performance?
Yeah, more than anything else that they've had.
So that's from the combination of, like, they've got one of the Amazon Annapurna Labs CPUs in there, so a 16-core ARM V8 CPU, 64-bit of course, and then that's wired straight into the Marvell switching ASIC. So it's a pretty simple architecture, but I mean, it's going to be effective, and there's a lot they can do with it. One thing that does stand out, though, to me, I guess this is probably the only negative comment, if you can take it as a negative, is straight off the bat, there's no MPLS support on the ASIC. So if you are running MPLS, which a lot of WISPs are, that still needs to be processed by the CPU. So it won't be able to be forwarded in hardware on the ASIC currently, but they've highlighted in the video, the product video that Giannis so graciously did, that is a future feature that will be coming. Yeah.
Yeah. While we're mentioning the video, I thought Giannis did a really good job. I was ribbing about it because, you know, he said some stuff that made me laugh, and he said, yeah, the marketing department did some punch-ups and they wouldn't let me take all of them out. So so it's definitely some of the like phrasing was like, who made Giannis say this? Not to say it's bad. It was just, you know, it was not necessarily authentic to him. But I would say the production value on these videos is like skyrocketed. This stuff looks great.
Really good.
Oh, hell yeah.
I'll definitely give them that. So while we're talking about the chipset, you mentioned that it's got the Marvell Prestera 98DX8525, I believe is what it is.
So it's got a code name. Is it Eldrin? I think is what the Mikrotik guys mentioned.
Cool.
So basically it is just a Marvell Prestera. It's just got a particular set of features. So all of these code names just mean it's X generation with Y features. So this one here has got the layer 3 forwarding, layer 2 forwarding, what they call eBridge and eRouter, which means it can do the forwarding on the chip. Yeah, and the particular layout of it with the ports as well is kind of what makes it special. So having the multiple 100 gig ports, and I think that chipset's actually got 24 times 25 gig ports on it, but they're only exposing 12 on the front of the device, and then I guess they've got 4 going to the SoC, and there's probably a bunch that they just couldn't fit on the front of the chassis or something.
I'm looking
like
at it. It says on the chipset, 24 ports of 25 gigi or 6 ports of 100 gigi. So it is, I mean, a lot of options. Bandwidth, 1.08 terabits of throughput, wire speed, 600 million packets per second. I mean, this is on the chipset, not necessarily to say that once Mikrotik does their kung fu, it's going to have that level of performance. Or, I mean, the features that you read on here too that are theoretically capable inside the chipset are pretty interesting. Some of this stuff, I did a lot of Googling because it's just unfamiliar to me. So like IEEE 802.1 QBG. What is that? EVB or EVB? Yeah, EVB stuff. So I had to look that up. And now that I mention it, it's fallen out of my head because I was Googling so many things. What is that? Do you remember?
I don't know, Greg.
It's Edge Virtual Bridging. I found it to be kind of interesting. It seems like it really ties in with like VMware and like your hypervised infrastructure. So it's like this method to where you can have it do like virtual NICs. So it's like you could do 802.1 AD, which is what is that? Like it falls out of my head. That's like Q and Q. There you are. Golly, I can't remember all these acronyms. So it allows you to do like Q and Q. It can also do 802.1Q. It supports that, but then you could do Q and Q inside of like a VLAN. I don't know. It just allows you to kind of like tag all these things together, but it also will like auto negotiate with the hypervisor itself to be able to kind of configure these things.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it's wacky wild. Like I was just reading the spec. I was like, none of this makes sense. I had to find diagrams. It's like there's too many things going on here to really for my tiny smooth brain to understand. But it's really interesting once you actually see the diagrams of how it can and also natively support kind of backwards compatibility with some of these things. So it's pretty neat. Theoretically in the chipset, whether they'll take advantage of that, who knows? Interesting stuff like that.
I think it might be 802.1
BR port extender,
that's how it goes.
right? Isn't that doesn't that allow it to? That's like a standards based port extender, so you can have something else act as like just kind of one homogeneous sort of set of ports for a switch, sort of thing.
It is. So Mikrotik support that already in some of their other products, but say the CRS310 and some of the other CRS3 series can actually act as a port extender to a CCR or to another switch. So you can have one that's like the master and then the other ones are like slaves. It's kind of like stacking, but a bit more primitive, in that all of the layer 2 frames are forwarded up to the master. So there's pros and cons to that, but it's a standards-based way of doing it. I think Marvell and a couple of other vendors came up with it as a really low-cost way to do kind of top-of-rack switches and that sort of thing, because they didn't need as big a CPU in them. I'm not sure how much of a success it's been, but certainly it's kind of a useful technology, and at least
also
it's
something else in the forwarding engine notes on this chipset. It's talking about dynamic load balancing for optimizing elephant flow distribution. And so I had to look that up. Like, what's the difference between a mouse flow and an elephant flow? And right, it's just the size of information you're transmitting in a single flow. An elephant being a big one, which working for a firewall vendor, I'm quite what's the
familiar
concept
with
of
this.
like
It's
you've got like big flows, right? And these can
So
consume a lot of the time on the wire or whatever.
Yeah.
Your smaller ones can get starved a little bit. Is that the idea?
Correct. So an elephant flow is like basically a line rate flow or near line rate flow, something that's like, say 10 gig if you're on a 10 gig connection, and it just runs constantly. So if you've got, say, an MRI machine that's streaming data, something insanely high bandwidth, that's considered an elephant flow. Now, a lot of platforms really struggle with elephant flows in particulars. They'll have like a switch sitting in front of the ASICs or the CPUs in it, and that switch might have 100 ports on the outside, but internally it might only have 10 or 40 gig ports to the system on a chip, and it really struggles to manage those elephant flows. So you often see a device that's got 100 gig in, but it's bottlenecked by that connection back to the system on a chip to like 25 gig or 40 gig or something like that. Now, other products like this, by the sounds of it, can spread the elephant flows and hardware across the connections up to the system on a chip, and it can alleviate that
pretty
somewhat.
Cool stuff. Theoretically built right into the chipset, so right there and available. I wonder if that's. Do you think that's a switch they have to turn on? Or do you think that's just on by default, like something that's says dynamic load balancing? So to me, it sounds like something you don't have to turn knobs on necessarily. That's wicked.
I'd say it's just on. Yeah, they'll probably have the option to turn it off though. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard with these Marvell chips because they're you need an NDA to find out exactly what they're doing. So I guess a lot of what I know has either come from things that I've picked up on the Mikrotik forums or through scouring the internet looking for little tidbits of information about them. But I'd say just based off other features on those chipsets, it's something that's always on.
So where do you see this piece of equipment fitting in an environment? Like, I guess, whether it's enterprise or ISP, I mean, that's going to probably look a little bit different, but where do you really see this piece kind of falling in place?
Yeah. Definitely as a border router and a distribution router. So if you've got wireless ISP or any sort of ISP where you need to do 100 gig or 25 gig routing to internet exchange, this is the perfect device for that. Or if you need to route up to your transit/transport providers, this is going to be a great router for that. Yeah. Likewise, if you're running a Ethernet ring network or a routed backbone, and you need more than 10 gigabits, this would be the router to look at because it's got all the redundancy in there, and you can run 100 gig between. I was trying to look at
interface compatibility. I know some of their equipment shows, like the CRS310 series, excuse me, switches. A lot of those show like compatibility with different optics and kind of what sort of works. So do you think you are on these 25 gig ports, do you think you'll have the option to put an SFP plus in there if you just want to hang a 10 gig off? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so definitely. It will work.
I was just going to say, like, I
can't see it not working.
I could see a lot of people wanting to, aggregate a bunch of, 10 gig interfaces, because there's 25 ports, right? So, or I don't know about, there's like 12 ports. That's what it is. Yeah, it's 12 ports.
12. Yeah, so that's one thing they highlighted in the introduction video is that you can reuse all your existing power supplies and optics. So I'd say it's going to
Yeah, I heard him say that, but until I see it in writing, it's kind of like, is that really what they meant to say? Was that a bit of a slip? This thing also has some M2 slots, M.2 slots. It's got a couple of those. What do you see that being useful for?
So what's interesting about those, and I'll make a comparison with the 2116 here, which is the slightly older router. The 2116, the M2 slots are actually NVMe, so they're PCI Express-based slots. On this one, they're SATA. So I thought that was a little bit odd, and I was kind of wondering, have they run out of PCI lanes? Why did they do that? But the use case I see for that is that you can run like the Dude on it or something with a large database. You can run Docker containers on it and use that storage for those. So for years and years, people have been complaining that their weird widgety app won't run on the Mikrotik or it's not available on the Mikrotik. Whereas with these and the M2 slots, you can just run a Docker image and put it onto the
So would you suggest somebody on their border router with 100 gig interfaces running Docker containers and stuff?
You probably wouldn't share that responsibility, that's for sure.
It's one of those. I think it's one of those features that they put in there to appease people. On a router like this, I don't really see the use case. On the smaller routers that people are installing into like a small business or a branch office or something like that, then yeah, I can see the use case for Docker there. But on big boys like this, it just
in my
seems
mind,
like a security risk to me.
When this is such a key important piece in your environment, run as few things on there as possible. only what's necessary. So it does, what is it? You said it has a CPU count of 16 cores running at 2 gigahertz each. So I mean, that's not bad. That's a little bit of pep, huh?
16 gigs of RAM too.
16 gigs of RAM, yeah. So it's got some power there. It's got some oomph. And they are saying that it does outperform the 1072s, correct?
That's right. Yeah, it's got significantly higher performance.
Do you remember what the street price of the 1072s were? Is this comparable?
It is at launch. I'd say it's cheaper now. I don't know what the 1072s go for recently, but I remember they had a fairly big price hike over their life cycle. So
gotcha.
This is
so
cheaper.
Do you know some people that are champing at the bit for this kind of piece of equipment?
Yeah, definitely. So a bunch of the wireless ISPs that I used to consult to in New Zealand and Australia really wanted to go beyond terabit, and they just couldn't because there was no Mikrotik product that did it. and stepping up to something like a Juniper or a Cisco, the budgets involved and the amount of money involved to do that was just too much for them. And they would have to re-architect their network significantly. So I think this is a really good solution for those sort of people.
What's missing that would make this amazing in your opinion?
That's a good question, mate.
Oh,
I guess V7 being more mature and stable, but it's pretty close, yeah. So hardware-wise, if it had a larger forwarding information base, e.g. the switch chip could hold more routes, that would be great. And if it could do layer 3 forwarding, MPLS forwarding, e.g. It could take MPLS frames in that had encapsulated layer 3 and forward those on the ASIC, that would also be amazing. But I mean, the price point. I just keep coming back to the price point. There's so many things you want, but the reality is this thing's
it's
under
incredible. Yeah, I mean, so. I honestly didn't know what to expect on the price point, but you know, $2,800 street price, that's pretty good. So I'm assuming it'll be maybe a little bit cheaper, but probably pretty close to that. So it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, it's an awesome piece of kit, power-wise for sure. And I guess
Curious to see what switches are going to come out to support 100 gigabit.
Hey, this is almost
Right.
guaranteed.
So
the Switch is going to
it's
come out
compelling
soon,
because of the price point. Like, it's not practical for everybody, but there's a lot of people I know who have gone through horrible forklifts on the edge when they need to upgrade capacity. And so there's a lot of WISPs that would probably be willing to pay this kind of price point to build a really high capacity edge early to not have to like upgrade later. And so this is actually price achievable for most people. I mean, lots of people were already buying 1072s, which is kind of a mistake based on the history of that product. But somebody could actually go in and build, especially when switches come out, a highly available 100 gigabit edge that they just don't have to touch if it's in the budget. I mean, it's just in the realm of possibility because of how cheap it is. It's kind of insane. It's definitely going to be disrupting. And this is just the first product that's 100 gig. So I'm curious what else is hidden behind the YouTube videos.
I've seen mention of the CRS5 series for about a year now, and I suspect that we will see those soon, and they will have.
Yeah, but that's a great point you've got, Nick. Like the future proofing concept, the idea that even if I've only got 10 gig now, I could put this in here theoretically as long as it takes my 10 gig optics, and then it'll carry me to my 25 gig aggregation, and then someday down the line I could do 100 gig, and it's got a lot of power. Just so, I mean, I'm having trouble thinking of a network that I have managed or am managing now where this wouldn't be overkill for it, which is exactly what I want, because I don't want to have to think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And honestly, too, and like my thinking is, if they add a knob later on that I really want to turn on, I don't want to have to think whether this hardware is going to be able to handle it or not. So if I've got more power than I need right now, then I know I'm kind of future-proofed in that respect. To some extent, anyway.
Yes, sir. I think this is a great product, and I'm pretty impressed with it. Like, it's more than I ever thought they would deliver. So
that's cool.
I mean, just hot swap everything was awesome, because they went hot swap power supplies to not hot swap to full hot swap. So I hope they keep that up, because that's really compelling. Including the fans, like having all that stuff just swappable is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised the CCR2004, the one with the 16 1 gig ports on it, that had hot swap power supplies. And then they released the 2116, which didn't have hot swap anything. And I was like, hey, what's going on here? And then they've gone the other direction with this, where everything is hot swap, which is good to see. So hopefully they keep that
in
up.
Every data center you ever go into, every piece of equipment I've touched in the last 10 years has pretty much hot swappable fans and power supplies. So this is going to feel right at home next to my rack of whatever it happens to be. And then kind of, outside the ISP environment, because, like the chipset spreadsheet or whatever is showing like, hey, one of our main uses is campus aggregation. Like, you've got all these high throughput devices everywhere. I mean, so that could be theoretically top of rack I mean, it is basically a switch under the hood, so you could do a lot of really fast aggregation and then route in hardware on that. So, I mean, I could just see it in a lot of different environments.
That's right.
There's a lot of good price point, like gray market switches in 25 gig density, like some of the Dell switches. So like just having a Mikrotik router that has the port speed, and you could use those switches that some people are already purchasing, like the Force 10s or the product series with the 25 gig ports. So it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, except those things don't run at 1 amp.
They don't.
Which is crazy. All right, so that wasn't the only hardware announcement. I mean, that's a big one. That's definitely, I would say, game changing, especially in a lot of naysayers' minds. Where they had like this default footprint of a Juniper MX series. Now there's something else that just kind of I would almost say came out of left field from Mikrotik. That's interesting, but I digress. We have more hardware announcements. So one that I am still somewhat struggling to find out where it fits in is the CCR2004-1G-2XS-PCIe. So it's basically a PCIe card that also doubles as a Mikrotik router, right?
Yep. When I saw this, I was like, why? And then I looked into it a little bit further. And I was like, actually, this is a damn good idea. Like, it's a PCI card that has basically PCI NIC interfaces facing the host, and they're connected to a full CCR2004 series router that's on the same card, like a half-height card with all of this functionality. And then on the back of the card, it's got two 25 gig ports and a single 1 gig port. Now, what's really funky is they've got some mechanism to do a direct pass-through of those 25 gig ports to the PCI bus, and it will mirror the connection state. So if the connection's up on the outside port, it'll be up on the PCI bus, and so on. So I'm not sure how they've done that, but that's quite interesting. But what really tweaked my interest with this was the fact that you can use this to terminate things like MPLS or act as a layer 3 firewall in front of virtual machines. You could terminate VXLAN, MPLS. The whole works on this card, and it's separate from your hypervisor host. And yeah, it's going to allow you to offload that and not have to worry about it at the hypervisor level. You can instead do it with Router OS and be familiar with the user interface and the operating system. And yeah, it's a very cool product.
A lot of that functionality, like theoretically, if you're building a bunch of hypervisors, VM hosts, right, that's going to support some kind of interesting infrastructure,
yep,
you could use some form of automation to have all of this controlled for you, and especially with communication between the hypervisor and this directly. Or I don't know, you probably would you have a centralized controller, or would you have the if you made the hypervisor do the communication to the PCI card that's a router, then that's all independent local configuration. So you could pick one of these up and drop it in. If that thing completely tanks, you just put another one in its place, and I mean, then it becomes just one piece. That's interesting. Like, I don't know, I hadn't really thought about like the full use cases for this because it was just so bizarre. I couldn't pick my jaw up off the floor, or maybe unbug my eyes trying to figure out what this did. But yeah, you're right. It's like the idea that it can act as just a standalone router, right? It could just be a router, or you could just pass through that functionality straight in the device. It's also got that gig port, but I think that comes off of kind of like a bridge with like a management. So it looks like there's two extra interfaces inside, one that's bridged to the Ethernet, and then another one that's just for management, or something akin to that. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. On the outside, there's that 1 gig Ethernet. I think that's like for doing net installs and kind of getting access to it easily. And then on the inside, there's 4 NICs by the looks of it. 2 are bridged straight through to the 25 gig ports, and then 2 go into that same bridge with Ether 1. But you can split it up and carve these up however you want.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the block diagram. They didn't have a block diagram for this card directly, but I looked at the one for the 2004, just the regular 2004, and it's got the same chipset in there, the AL32400, and it's got 2 25 gig lanes coming off of, and I guess that's going one to each one of those interfaces, and then it's got one gig lane coming off. So that's going to be, I mean, yeah. So they basically just took the lanes and directly mapped them to physical interfaces. So just straight off the chip. That's pretty neat.
So I see a lot of use cases for this, but the one that kind of interested me was that terminating like VXLAN tunnels or something into VMs, just because it's a pain in the backside to do that on like a Proxmox host or a VMware host, and this just makes the problem go away.
That's
interesting.
I heard somebody say that
pricey,
even if you wanted it to act just as a 25 gig interface, it's still sometimes cheaper than going out and buying a dedicated card just for that.
That's what I was going to say.
Because I think these have got an RRP of like $199 or like that. So the price point is pretty attractive. There's nothing else out there.
They did say that there are some caveats with this thing, right? So one of them happened to be, it is a router, right? So whenever it boots up, it's going to boot up slower, theoretically, than maybe the host hypervisor or whatever. So your hypervisor may be up and ready for utilization, but that interface didn't come up. So you might have to do a little kung fu, what they say, add a PCI device initialization delay in the BIOS, or I think they also somewhere specified, here's some Linux commands you can add in that will kind of clear it out and then refine those devices. So maybe a little bit of kung fu you got to do here and there to make it work.
Yeah, so a lot of server BIOSes do have the ability to delay the boot based on a PCI device. That's going to be pretty clunky, and you're going to have to do it in the BIOS and get the DRAC or ILO and muck around to find the setting. The other option is the one that they provided in the newsletter, where you can basically add a string to, I think it's grub or whatever bootloader you're using, and it will pass it to the kernel and delay the boot. One thing I'm surprised that Mikrotik didn't do was add a PCI option ROM to this. You know how like SAS and SCSI HBAs, when you turn on a computer or a server, you'll see that screen pop up where it's detecting the drive before the BIOS comes up. They could quite easily do a similar thing with this, where it pops up a screen, does like a 20-second or 30-second countdown before it goes to the rest of the boot process, and that would be handled external to the server's operating system or BIOS. I think that would be a really good option to kind of let the card boot before the machine does the rest of its boot cycle. And it's compatible with old traditional BIOS as well as UEFI. So I think that would be a good option. I don't know if they're going to do that in the future or, what the story is. But
it's interesting. I never, like, that didn't even occur to me. I wonder, in that mode, could you actually have it break in to the CLI on the card itself? So have it boot and then connect into the... to like, just the CLI of Mikrotik if you wanted to?
It definitely could. So when it loads the option ROM, just like on the HBAs, it can use the I2C bus or SPI bus to communicate with the operating system on the card. So the card could actually tell the option ROM when it had booted and let it continue to boot the machine. So that would be an option there too. But I don't know if this is something Mikrotik have looked at or if it's on a future roadmap, but it would certainly be a really good move if they do that. It'll improve the user experience.
Plus, it's like, a serial connection right into the device. So you could theoretically get in there and fix something.
Yeah.
If it goes wrong, you do a firmware upgrade and it doesn't go according to plan. At least you have some kind of recourse. Like if you have an IPMI or a DRAC or something, then you would be able to backdoor and basically see the screen and fix whatever it happened to be and go on with your life. That would be cool.
Would be. So that's a cool product, but they had two others as well. I'll jump on to the next one, which was it the CRS310-1G5S-4S plus IM. It's even longer than the 2216 product string. Basically, this is a replacement for the CRS210, which was pretty popular back in the day. It's an all-fiber desktop switch. Pretty interesting port layout. It's got 5 1 gigs SFPs and 4 10 gig SFP plus. And I was kind of thinking, that's odd. I wonder why they've done it that way. I would have kind of expected to see 2 SFP plus and 8 1 gig SFPs, but I guess the use case for this is that you could create a ring or distribution network between buildings and deliver 5 customers within that building with 1 gig fiber connections, or you could have 2 fiber connections going into a building, feed 2 customers in that building with 10 gig, and then another 5 with 1 gig. So it gives you a few options there. This is based on the same Marvell Prestera chipsets, which seem to be so common with Mikrotik now. And it's got a basic layer 3 feature set within it, as well as the standard layer 2 forwarding and a small CPU. So if you wanted to do some very basic NAT and router OS functionality on it, you can. The big thing with this is it does run router OS. It's not running switch OS. So it's nice and small.
Yeah.
And it's
coming in at a street price of around $200 too.
Right, yeah, I didn't even price.
That's pretty good, especially when you look. Max power consumption is 20 watts. It's incredible. It's even got a fan built in on this one. So if you've got it hidden back in a corner, in a storage room or something like that, it'll still at least be able to cool itself to some extent. It looks like it's got two inputs. It's got one DC jack. I mean, we've come accustomed to seeing this. It's got the DC jack input and then a PoE input on the Ethernet port, the management port. So that's right. Standards based AFAT on that. Standard, everything else.
You know what else I noticed?
A serial port, an RJ45 serial port.
So big props to Mikrotik.
I love it. And I like that it's RJ45 and not like a DB9. Good to see that.
Yeah, those DB9s are so annoying nowadays because if you want to connect them to a console, you need an adapter, and then your rack door generally won't close because the adapter hits the rack door. So I'm quite happy to see that.
And this is definitely a switch. So it's a small device, 1 CPU, 800 megahertz. Yeah, so this is going to be a switch. But again, like you said, full router OS, so it's going to be able to take advantage of all of the cool features that you have grown accustomed to.
There are really so many products at once. This one's kind of been overshadowed by the big boys, but it's still a very cool product.
You can get rack ears for it. So even though it is, a desktop form factor, it's still rack mountable if you want it to be. And you could turn those rack ears sideways and just screw it to a wall. I mean, that's how I see it being utilized. You just screw this tiny little thing to the wall, be done with it. Have some fire resistant. That's normally what we do here. It'll be like a piece of fire resistant plywood in the telecom room. Turn the ear sideways, screw it in, go get coffee and donuts.
So, Greg, where would you use a product like this? I could see this.
Oh, man, I could just see it in a lot of different places. I could see it being a NID in a building. So if I'm doing property, and so some of the properties that I've been chasing, they're a combination of an MDU, right? Like, so it's apartment or multifamily living, but then also ringing around it is commercial space, right? Kind of out away. And so, yeah, this would give me the ability to pop this in one of those commercial buildings, and then I could aggregate all of my users, because in those buildings, 90% of the lighting is going to be, or traditionally it was fluorescent. Now it's a lot of LED stuff, but I also don't know what the environment's going to look like. Usually things are outside of Ethernet distance. So if I've got this in here, I can really account for kind of any situation, as well as, like you mentioned, the extra 10 gig ports. I've got ring capabilities, so I can start completing some stuff, adding a little bit more redundancy into those environments. How about you, Nick? I bet you guys can see at your current employer, you guys do a lot of fiber aggregation at towers and stuff like this. Is this something that's interesting to you?
Yeah, Mikrotik's done a really good job at the higher density ports for switches, but there's a lot of tower sites where it's all solar and battery only. And so having something that is doesn't have as many 10 gig ports, like we've been using a ton of the 317s and the 309s. So this is just a little bit smaller, less power draw. The Nettonic switches and stuff, they only support 1 gig. So there's a handful of 1 gig ports to pop in there, extra 10 gig ports for backhauls or the connection to the router. So it's pretty nice. Probably most of the smaller sites that aren't using like a 1036 could definitely use a switch like this. So I think it's great. Just it's more options, more port density options. You don't have to always buy something that's too big.
Yeah, and two, I mean, we said it's got 5 standard SFP ports and 4 SFP pluses. you could still put SFPs in, 3 of those SFP pluses. So you could still have, 8 SFPs coming off of one 10 gig interface. So, it's just, I love how much flexibility it gives you, right? It's there if I need it. Even if in most of my environments I'm not going to utilize it, it's still there. So I've got options. I can really dig that.
Yeah. Now, it would be really cool to see a version of this that had, say, 8 1 gig PoE or 2.5 gig PoE ports and then 2 10 gig uplinks. Because, like, to Nick's use case, you can put it at a small tower, DC power it, power all your radios, and then backhaul it over fiber to, I guess, your main location. It would be a really cool switch. And I know Mikrotik have got outdoor switches that can do that, but a lot of, I guess, WISPs are not deploying the switches outdoors. They want them in a cabinet so it's nice and dry and safe, and they can get to it easily when there's a storm, and they can run power to it more easily as well. So, yeah, different use cases, but I think an indoor version of this that has the 1 gig PoE
you're
ports
talking
would be
about
a really good
PoE
seller.
1 gig ports. I believe this one can do some layer 3 hardware offloading. So that actually, I mean, you could use this as like a tower router, right?
Can.
Be able to aggregate, I mean, one device.
Definitely.
You don't have to have a router and a switch and do all that stuff. You just replace it with this and it takes care of everything.
Yep. So one thing that hasn't really been covered in the past by Mikrotik, I'm kind of surprised at, is you can actually use these switches as a DHCP server. You can allocate IPs to your customers that are on VLANs, and then the switch will actually do all of the routing. It doesn't need to tunnel it back to a central location to terminate PPPoE. It can do it all at wire speed. So yeah, that's a pretty good use case, and not one that I've really heard people talking about. But this switch would be ideal for it, or even the PoE
I've done that
version
exact
would be even
thing
better.
on a couple of different networks. I liked it, kind of the distributed nature of it, so that if my centralized PPPoE server went down, my entire network is down. Whereas if each tower is running it, and I just happen to have a problem at that site, it's only, it limits the blast radius, I guess, a bit.
Does big time. So most of the ISPs that I've consulted to in the past have actually moved to that model where they're running the concentrator at the tower router for that exact reason. The blast radius is smaller. The downside is it adds quite a lot of complexity, but
yeah,
the benefits are
especially
massive to
once
it.
you start making these things cookie cutter, the complexity really goes down because it's the same thing everywhere.
Correct. That's right. So yeah, like I generally create a script that the WISP owners could actually just paste into a new router, and it would work everything out. They just had to put in, like, I think 3 different IPs, and it would do the rest for them. And yes, it's not that hard.
The
once you
hard part's
cookie cutter
getting into
it.
document everything, right?
Correct.
Weakest link is the ink. That goes to contracts as well as documentation. All right. Well, we said there was product, and I noticed there was something else. I think it was in this newsletter as well. They released yet another 60 gigahertz product. It's the CubeSA Pro, and they have the CubeSA Pro as well. Well, and it also says, let me get the whole thing right. CubeSA Pro AC, CubeSA 60 Pro AC. And so you can buy the CubeSA Pro AC, which is point-to-point, I believe. And you could even get it into a pack where they're pre-configured, kind of like you used to be able to do with a wireless wire. Yeah, and as well as the SA is like a base station, I guess. It's kind of like a sectorized, or no, yeah, sectorized. It's like wider angle for multiple clients to connect. Is that right? God,
Yeah, there's an AP unit and then a higher gain unit for the Pro in these two diffs that they released.
So the new cool thing about these are they are 802.11 AY, right? The new standard. They also have the fallback to 5 gigahertz. It's an interesting design. They look super industrial. I mean, they almost look.
Looks all metal, which is why I've been a fan of Mikrotik stuff, like the wireless stuff, for a long time. Everyone craps on them, but if you've ever held like a net metal in your hand with the metal enclosure and SFPs on it, like they just build their stuff a lot better than some of the other WISP products, even if it's not as user friendly. I mean, this device, you could put a sticker on the front. And
It does
look
kind of look
camera.
like, or like if this was mounted on a utility pole, you'd think it was one of those radar guns, like taking a picture of you speeding or something. It does. I mean, it's very industrialized design. The new, it's kind of a new mount design. It looks like it's made of aluminum as opposed to steel. I'm assuming maybe that's part of a heat sinking. I'm not sure because it kind of has that heat sink aesthetic or whatever. One thing of note is that it's got a 1 gig copper Ethernet port coming off of it. And that's how you PoE power it as well. Does that surprise you, either Nick or Andrew?
For this first product, I don't think so. It's hard to say because, I mean, I think they were one of the first to talk about like the Terragraph initiative, but never released products. And then with these products, they said in software, these are going to be like Terragraph compatible. So I imagine there's going to be some bigger stuff with some 10 gig ports, but I think some of the use cases that they drew up, they were expecting you to get that higher capacity over the RF side on the AP rather than the port. I'm just excited to see them do more wireless products in 60. I think the form factor looks nice. Like they're really small. They look a lot more professional than some other equipment. But I'm just curious where this is going to go long term, especially on the Terragraph side of things.
Yeah, I have a bit of an opinion here. I was very surprised to see that they were only 1 gig. Not so much on the little unit, but on the sector antenna. Like that's the base station, and it's only got a 1 gig connection on it. So you're kind of hamstringing your 802.11ay there. And also a bunch of the other vendors' products, e.g. Cambium, do have higher speed ports on the base station and the CPE. So I was kind of interested that Mikrotik hadn't looked at the rest of the market and kind of built their product to match them. But at the same time, there's price point. And again, this is cheaper than anything else out there, and it looks pretty well made. So only having a 1 gig port is
so the sectorized one is street price about $199, and the just the regular like cube one, just the standard one. It's weird. It's got kind of like an overhang on the top. What would you call that? Almost like a shroud that kind of hangs. So it kind of resembles like an old security camera, like you'd see back in the day. Yeah.
Slap a sticker. Put a little LED on the front or something.
But those are coming in at street price of like $150. So a pair of these for the point-to-point would be right under $300. And they're saying on these, since they unlocked the 5th channel, what did they say? Like 2.4 kilometers, so like 1.5 miles on these things.
Yeah.
And
that's pretty impressive.
Not only did they say that, but they said
Basically.
like stable. So that was an interesting word. So it does have the fallback to 5 gigahertz, but they're saying, 1.5 miles stable. That's pretty impressive for something that appears to be, the size of a Kleenex box or a small Kleenex box. Actually, maybe, I don't know. What would you like in that size too? The size of your fist? I got big meat hooks. I don't know about you guys.
I don't know if that's
I'm looking
right.
for dimensions on this thing. Where are the dimensions? Maybe it's in the supporting documentation. Let me look at the product brochure.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the 2216, there's no block diagram, but there is like just a PDF of the dimensions of the box, like height, width, and depth. I thought that was kind of weird. I wonder if they're just behind on the official block diagram documentation, but I don't see anything for this product.
Says it's 115 mil by 95 mil by 82 mil, so it's pretty tiny.
By like 9 by 8. Yeah, that is really small.
Yeah.
But even like Cambium and Cyclu, they've got their CPE device. There's a 10 gig variant, and there's one that's only 1 gig. But they both, I think, have more than one copper port. So I'm curious. I mean, at least in the Terragraph space, Cambium's got like 140 degrees on their AP, and then Cyclu's got the 490s in the trash can sort of form factor. They're also considerably more power draw, so I don't know what is coming down the pipeline for that type of product.
I was thinking about this, Nick, and I kind of thought maybe they're just going to have 2 or 3 of these connected to a net power and use that to do the, I guess, to build the omnidirectional solution rather than having a single box that points in all directions. But
can you? I mean, I don't
knows?
have any experience with them. The nRAYs. Do you? I mean, how would you compare these to the nRAY device?
So CPU-wise, they're much weaker. They've basically gone from 64-bit system on a chip that was, I think, quad-core, back to the IPQ4019. It's the same CPU as in the HAP AC2 and a bunch of their other kind of lower-end products. The difference is this has got the 802.11ay radio, so the radio is obviously a lot better. The other thing is with the nRAY, it has the capability, even though Mikrotik are not using it, to run a 2.5 gigabit port with PoE. So I was quite surprised that they hadn't just used that same form factor and system on a chip with the newer radio. But this product may have been in development for a lot longer than the nRAY.
That's one thing I was thinking. It's like, maybe they were waiting on supply chain issues to resolve before they could start spitting this stuff out. Right?
That's right.
These products were on the table in previous YouTube videos, and they weren't talked about. They were just kind of propped there. So who knows how long they've had them.
Yeah, and Mikrotik have been talking about Terragraph for years and years now. So this is the first sign that it's actually coming to fruition.
Did I hear tale that
kind of exciting?
Facebook is kind of abandoning Terragraph and saying, all right, I've started it. You guys go forth and prosper now. Is that what I've sort of heard?
I've heard those murmurings.
Yeah. Meta.
Nothing substantiated though, Greg.
Well, I saw a post the other day that since Facebook renamed to Metaverse, that they've lost 500 billion in value. So wouldn't surprise me if they were letting some stuff go. Like, maybe we won't put so much time and attention, aka money, into those side projects anymore.
So that the basis of Terragraph is basically their OpenR platform. So it was invented for Terragraph, and then they've used it across the rest of their routing thing. It's basically like a routing engine that uses Redis and a bunch of other technology to exchange routes without using BGP and OSPF. So the Terragraph products from Cambium and Ciclu are built on that routing mechanism. And now Facebook have opened it up to the world, and I guess people can go and implement it. I've always thought that it was kind of reinventing the wheel. There's a bunch of other routing protocols out there that have got just as good a functionality, maybe not quite as, I guess, modern, e.g. they don't have REST interfaces and they're not using, I guess, JSON to exchange data and that sort of thing. But protocols like even OSPF can do a fairly good job, or there's HWMP Plus or OLSR, or Babel's a really good option to create these small mesh networks between the devices. And then you can create an overlay between them using protocols that Mikrotik already support. You don't need to go out and implement all these new fancy things that are kind of unproven and have limited support from the industry. That was just my personal opinion, but I mean, I haven't implemented Terragraph, so maybe it's got some magic that I don't see.
Well, the fun part about Terragraph products specifically in the WISP industry is most of the promises aren't even built into the software yet. So, I mean, for example, Ciclu, I think theirs is their own proprietary take on the Terragraph model of having the mesh, but the mesh is not available in software right now. I think it's I don't know if it's in or third quarter of this year. It's supposed to be on the pipeline. It doesn't have SNMP support yet on their devices. So I think that, some of the WISPs, or not WISPs, some of the vendors are sort of supporting the Facebook model, and then they're also doing their own proprietary model, which I thought was kind of interesting. So maybe they knew ahead of time that this might not be long-term supported, because I think on the Facebook model, they have their own infrastructure hosted that you can use for some control or something that they're talking about potentially not supporting anymore. So you won't be able to use that system. But I talked to Ciclu a little bit about their product specifically and what's coming down the pipeline. And so they like the layer 2 failover model, and they want to try to use software to figure out how much signal loss there is per sector and try to use that for some intelligence to sort of move traffic around. But it's not even in the software. You can't play with it. You can't touch it. It's just something that they're working on right now, and they're trying to tightly integrate it with their management platform. And so their goal is to give you a wireless system that you can deploy. Most of the traffic moving and adjustments for cost and the way that the system works, they want to try to tightly integrate that into their software platform. So you just have to worry about deploying it, handing off to customers, and then there's probably going to be some light configuration, but they're talking about testing some latency stuff, testing some capacity stuff, and sort of automatically, based on how many hops, allowing it to fail over on its own, which is kind of the whole sell of Terragraph, is having that self-healing mesh system. Obviously, the capacity as well. But nobody has a full product delivered that like has all that stuff yet, but they're to market. So
yeah. See, the way I always saw it is there's been so many attempts at doing meshes in the past, and the only thing I could see Terragraph bringing was that it was 802.11ay, so it had more bandwidth. The feature set didn't seem to really be any better than anything else. It's just that it was controller-based and had integrated telemetry.
Or at least that's the promise, right?
I mean,
and lots of marketing. Yeah.
Well, and the distances is things get really weird too, because everything on the marketing, like if you want that, you got to be well within 100 meters. So as long as you're nice and close, you can get something like 2 gigabit symmetrical per sector, and there's 4 sectors. And then they're going to have some channel bonding options if you want to connect between the nodes, or if you want to use a long range device. But yeah, it's confusing for people who have never dealt with that type of model, and it's not really built yet. So people have to sort of build the network in such a way that they can sort of transition to the meshing later, but they have to deal with not having that on the table now as they deploy hardware. So it's a little
That's
weird
interesting
right
on
now.
the speeds and stuff. Like maybe they should put in their marketing. If you can throw a rock from the base station and hit somebody, you can get these speeds. Otherwise, and then start caveating it from there. Because yeah, like 100 meters is not very far.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be density and close. Yeah, it's supposed to be density. It's not supposed to be like long haul deployments like most people are used to. This is meant to be nice and close. You're supposed to have the access points sort of within range of each other for that healing mechanism, but it's expensive. And so if you wanted to do a high density city, the between the planning and how much hardware you need, as soon as you start stretching those links pretty long, you kind of cripple the whole sector.
All right. Well, let me roll back to the Cube60 before we put that to bed, because I want to ask one question of both of you guys. If you were to change this product in some way to make it perfect, what's that change look like?
I mean, bigger ports, I'm sure. I mean, it makes sense to have a bigger port.
Bandwidth on that output port. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. Yep, so the changes I'd make would probably change the system on a chip to the one from the nRAY, or even the one from the CCR2004, if they can get the power budget, and then add a SFP Plus and a 2.5 gig on the sector, and then on the client ones, the little cubes. I mean, they could add both, but I mean, worst case, just add the 2.5
If it, say,
gig.
for example, it rose the price by $75 per unit, is that acceptable? I was gonna say, if it had 10 gig port, and you can actually get some decent throughput on this thing, to me that sounds like a pretty decent deal. Even I mean, because that's always the trade-off, right? It's going to cost more money. What's acceptable? I'm just curious.
That's right, and I think having like a 10 gig or a 2.5 is going to allow people to do higher speed bridges, which realistically is the main use case for this product. Like, Mikrotik won't have these dreams about multi-point and Terragraph and that, but 95% of people buying them are just going to be bridging 2 buildings. So the higher the speed of the port on it,
I think in the promotional video they said
going
something about, it's like you don't need your wireless wires. This is like the new wireless wire or something like that. So yeah, I mean, to me, that's them, all but saying, hey, yeah, we see you using this as, a virtual wire between 2 things. So yeah.
I mean, $75 might not be much to us in the West, but in places like the Philippines and Indonesia, that might be a lot of money. So they can always just have a different product variation to suit different markets.
And that's not,
and price
I mean,
points.
like, right. This isn't all that's ever going to come out. There could be another cube that just hasn't, seen the light of day yet, right? With those ports.
Yeah. It's a Mikrotik, so they always dip their toes in the water to.
And
to
all
see
they
what
ever
it's
hear us
like
say is,
before
give me
they
more, give me
go
more.
full in.
But, I mean, to that end, if we don't say it out loud, how are they going to know, what we're looking for, right? It's, I don't necessarily, I wonder if they do any, like, market research. I'm assuming they have kind of like a core group of maybe vendors or users that they talk to, but, you got to get your voice out there. You got to be heard somehow.
Yeah, someone's got to complain. They don't have Mikrotik user meetings at the moment where they've got thousands of nerds harassing them.
Yeah, for sure. I'm assuming they're all going to get used to that, though, not having to travel like madmen like a quarter of the year. So we may not see it the way we used to back in the day.
One thing I was going to comment about is on the data sheet for those Cube Pros, the little drawings are really cool on them. They show basically like a festival setup where the sector antenna is up on a pole and then all the kiosks or gazebos or whatever you want to call them are linked back to it. So it shows a really good example of a use case there of using it for temporary high-speed access for things like point of sale and that sort of thing.
I think they said, you remember festivals?
Really cool
those will
picture.
come back one day. These would be great options for that. I was like, yeah, I do remember those. That would be great.
It would be.
For sure.
They're selling futures again.
I mean, it's all coming back. Slowly but surely, it's all coming back. Faster over here than over there, obviously. But yeah, we're all heading in the right direction at least. All right, man. I think that is all of the new hardware. That was a lot of new hardware. There's a lot to talk about there. You excited about the direction they're moving?
Definitely, yeah. It's a great
Sometimes
direction.
they do stuff
I
that's
think they're
just
heading.
exhausting. It's like, why are you doing this again? Come on, let's. But like to me, all of this felt good. Again, the that new 2004 is still breaking my brain a little bit, but I think it's a cool product. Hopefully, it finds. I mean, it feels a bit like a solution looking for a problem, but I think it could be really great and cool. So,
Yeah.
The amount of interest out there in it is pretty high. Like the Serve the Home guys are interested in it. Obviously, Linus Tech Tips have already shown interest in it. So even if new users are brought to the Mikrotik platform because of the price point and they're just going to use it as a NIC, at least they're finding out about Mikrotik and how powerful it is. So
you think
I think it's good. Just
you think that
from
PCI
perspective.
2004 will be able to run Docker at some point? Should you run Docker on it? Is maybe the
Probably
better
will.
question. Because I could think of a few really
I can think of a few
crazy
use
demos
cases.
that I could make. Because like my day job is automation, so the idea of like the crazy kung fu you could do with something like this is really like it gets me excited to think about.
It's very compelling to do some local processing of like telemetry and data to like for management, like having a way to tunnel from that container to a cloud platform that is sort of secure. You can manage the interface. You can apply a firewall between it. That's really compelling because you could, compile something in like Go or something embedded and slap it on a container, and now you've got a really powerful management plane like sidecar, I guess.
But
on
these
the
things,
hardware.
do they have? Do they
But
have?
it's gonna be
No,
abused.
it's not. No, it is an ARM processor, right? It's like 64-bit ARM. All right, which means it'll run zero tier.
It is.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it could like zero tier your DRAC. You drop this thing in, create like this. Oh man, you can do all kinds of crazy, weird things with this.
You could upgrade your whole home to 25
Yeah,
days.
exactly.
Just buy the router, buy a bunch of cards.
Yeah, I'll melt my 56K
Put it in your
internet
desktop
connection
computer.
for sure. All right, man. Well, I don't know that I have anything else to talk about. I think that felt like a mic drop to me. Do you guys have anything cool, new, interesting, different you want to talk about?
One thing I will bring up is if you've been following the RotorOS V7 development, it's really starting to pick up pace now. So you can now do VRFs semi-reliably in RotorOS V7. They're fixing a bunch of BGP issues and just general, I guess, hardware-related issues on it. So yeah, it's worth looking at if you haven't already.
I saw in our Slack group on the Mikrotik one, a couple of guys were talking about the CCR2004s. Now that they're running on version 7, they've been super stable, super reliable. I think somebody said they're pulling 1 or 2 full BGP feeds on one, so they haven't had a hiccup, which is really good news. Exceptionally good. And I think the regular 2004 is what's like a $500-$600 device, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah, awesome price.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
All right. Well, I say we stick a fork in it because I know we only borrow Andrew Thrift. We don't own him. We only get to pull him off the shelf every now and then, but then we have to put him back just the way we found him. So, Andrew Thrift, if folks out on the internet want to get a hold of you, interact with you in some fashion, get hair tips, whatever it is, how would you have them do that?
They can join the Little Brothers WISP Patreon and then join our Slack channel. That would be fantastic. I'm happy to talk to you there.
Wicked.
Otherwise, you can find
Nick
me on
Arellano.
LinkedIn.
Where can folks find you on the internet?
You can, of course, you can reach out on the Little Brothers WISP Slack group, and you can email me at nick.a@pay.com.
All right. You guys can find me at greg@gregsoul.com, where I very regularly blog, although I haven't done anything except for be a sales engineer here lately. It's crazy. I'm actually having to work for a living. This is ridiculous. It's not why you go to sales. You don't go to sales to work, Thrift. You lied to me. But anyway, I do regularly blog there. If you guys have any questions or comments, you can hit my email address, contact us at the Brothers WISP. It all goes to the same place. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Thrift. Thank you, Nick. And we'll see you guys next time. You hit stop.
Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.